Good afternoon, viewers. I am Shankar Kumar. I teach history at Hindu College in University of Delhi, and today we will be talking about in this CEC Gurukul lecture about Reformation. I have already spoken to you twice on this particular topic, giving you the general background of Reformation, and also have spoken to you about Luther and his ideas so far as triggering of this particular movement in European history is concerned. We are talking about 16th century, and we are talking about reformations that were effected in the Catholic Church around 16th century in Europe, and the intellectual climate, the political climate, the economic scenario, the politics at that point of time, they all rode on this movement, or you can say that this movement was also partially triggered on account of these factors. I have already spoken to you about all these, and today we would particularly be speaking about the Lutheran and Calvinist or Reformed Church, as it started being said subsequently. So this is more about the nomenclature. At a particular point of time, after a decade in the 16th century, people started referring to Calvinism as Reformed movement or Reformed Church. And we will see the merit and demerit of these arguments as to why we refer to it like this, or what was the political condition or religious context in which people started referring to Calvinist reformations as reformed, and not particularly limited to the contribution of a person, Calvin. So let's begin with Lutheran ideas. And it would be better if you consult the earlier parts of this lecture, lecture 1 and lecture 2 on Reformation, the general background or the overview, and Reformation and Luther, and in continuity we are discussing the things today. Now, we have already seen that there were three main questions around the Lutheran revolt in Germany. First was why to break with Rome, and when we say Rome here, think of the papacy, think of the Roman, the Pope at this point of time. So Luther, located somewhere in Germany, is trying to break away from the papal control exercised from Rome, as earlier was the situation. So there were several political trappings to this, right? Then second is why the Germans rallied to his cause, and the answer lies in the fact that they were swept by religious nationalism. So the sheer fact that Germans had to pay, or people everywhere under Roman Pope had to pay teeth or the church tax, and the sheer fact that they switched their loyalty or adherence from Catholicism to Lutheran religion would allow these rulers to appropriate this tax and not send it to Rome. So there were, as I said, that economic and political underpinnings to these questions. Third, of course, was why several German princes put Lutheran reforms into effect. The answer lies in the fact that it was the desire of these German princes to make their governance as absolute as possible. So it was essentially the desire for absolute governmental sovereignty that they backed Lutheran revolt. And all these things tell you that despite Luther concentrating only on a certain aspect, a specific aspect of the theology, like justification by faith and so forth, he just couldn't overlook the overall political reality in which he was operating. And therefore, we find that the preacher, the populace, and the princes, the three P's, they all came together, but with different motives to effect Reformation. And it was not only you can say ills or corruption in the church or decadence that had marked the functioning and other aspects of Catholic Church at this point of time. If you see this in detail, you will find that there is some kind of a sense of understanding the first 4 or 5 centuries of Christianity as the golden period that they wanted to revive. And therefore, as you can see on your slide, that Luther's preference is to a rigorously Augustinian system of theology, which had come into being at around 400 CE, rather than the medieval Thomistic one. So these are just Catholic theological issues that are at work. I have earlier spoken to you about Luther's fascination for justification by faith, and he would say that the religion of work or merit accruing from one's work in this lifetime has absolutely no role to play in the choice that God will make in order to salvate someone. So it is all predestined. And the entire justification can come only by faith and not by work or by any merit in the lifetime. Similarly, in 1517, we find that Pope Leo X had proclaimed the sale of indulgence. I have already told you about sale of indulgence, that is like giving some kind of a ticket to heaven. Or ensuring some booking into the heaven, or to free oneself from the sins of one's life, or to allow someone to be chosen by God for salvation and so forth. So all these corrupt practices had entered into the working of church. And at this instance of sale of indulgence for worldly affairs, Albert of Hohenzollern had violated Luther's own conviction that people are saved by faith and not works. So these are theological issues that were at play. In 1517, October 31st, Luther had come out with his famous 95 theses that he had nailed on the door of the castle church at Wittenberg, and this is supposed to have formally begun the Protestant Reformation, and later this thesis was translated from Latin to German, and therefore the role of printing press that had become quite popular by 16th century in Europe, although it had the invention had actually come from China, but by 16th century in Europe it had spread fairly widely, and that greatly helped in popularizing these pamphlets and writings and making people aware across geography in Europe. 1519 was public disputation before throngs of Leipzig, and Luther had declared that popes were mere fallible men, and the highest authority for individual conscience was the truth of Scripture and nothing else. And therefore there is an implicit denial of any role that the popes can play, or the church officials can play in an individual's commitment to God, or in an individual's chances of getting salvated. Therefore, Pope Leo X had charged Luther with heresy, and this marked the break with Catholic faith in entirety, so far as the German areas under the influence of Luther was concerned. 1520, Luther comes out with 3 seminal pamphlets that outlined what went on to become the Lutheran religion as such. And the important bullet points in that is justification by faith. I have already spoken about it, that nothing else but it is faith in the scriptures that would matter in the case of choice that is made by God to salvate someone, nothing else, not even work in one's lifetime, or issuing of indulgence certificates, etc., by papal authorities. Second was the primacy of scriptures as opposed to any other belief, practices or accretions that had added onto the practices during the medieval times in Christianity. And third was the priesthood of all believers. True spiritual state, as per Luther, was the congregation of all the faithful, rather a special club of ordained priests. So the privileged position, or over the medieval times, the way some priests or some section of church officials had come to privilege themselves over others, even in spiritual matters, that you can say that practice is entirely negated by the teachings of Luther. And therefore, the priests had no supernatural authority as per Luther, and therefore he preferred to call them as pastors or ministers and nothing more. He also said a big no to ecclesiastical hierarchy. He called for abolishing monasticism. He even permitted the ministers to marry. Luther himself married in 1525. And overall, we find that these pamphlets by Luther had quite electrified Germany, and there the role of printing press, as I just mentioned, was formidable. 1521, Luther is declared a heretic. Church formally released Luther to his overlord, the Elector Frederick the Wise, for proper punishment. Then comes the Edicts of Worms, which was some kind of a punishment to Luther, but it was never properly enforced. Why? Because the princes were very much in favor of Luther. And why they were in favor of Luther, that we have already discussed. So by 1522, Luther returns to Wittenberg, and many princes also converted to Lutheranism. And by 1530, considerable territories in Germany was very much under this new faith. And this tells us to spare a little bit of time to understand German social base of Luther's reforms. Number one, of course, is the common people, populace. Luther had won their interest and admiration for his Defiance. So Defiance has a seductive charm in itself for common people, defying the church. So that made a hero out of Luther. And then the sequence of what we can say economic and climatic, or you can say events that had nothing to do with religion as such, but it tells you as to why a particular idea started being received by a set of people all the more, because we are aware of the Black Deaths in the 14th century, and that led to agrarian crisis. And this agrarian crisis meant alarming drop in wheat prices in the period of 1450 to 1520. And since the wheat prices were not very high, so the peasants felt impelled to move away from farms, or there was some kind of a migration of agrarian population to the cities. And this migrated rural population, when they came to the cities, they were denied entry or access to trade guilds and city councils, which were traditional bodies of representation for artisans and merchants and so forth. This was a cause of discontent in the new urban proletariat, and therefore these peasants who had migrated to these areas started demanding for broader based representative governments. Now it is this angst of the peasants which was critical so far as accepting Lutheran idea of defiance or revolt is concerned. Noteworthy is the fact that Lutheran strongholds were northern towns of Germany that were not so advanced, and it is precisely this area that these peasants had gone to. And the northern part of German towns located in the northern part of Germany, of course, were not that advanced as compared to their southern counterpart, and Luther is more popular in the northern cities of Germany. And Luther is laying emphasis on redeeming the individual, whereas Zwingli, who is operating in some other part of Europe, spoke of redemption of community. So there is some kind of a difference over here, but they are all part of the same process of Reformation. So what we find is that there is some sort of a coupling of reformist demands with social and political change. People also disliked the idea of money being pumped off to Rome, and that I have already spoken about. Now, apart from the common people, it is the princes who become the other pillar of social support for Lutheran revolt. And the reasons for that, of course, I have discussed earlier as well: retention of the taxes or ecclesiastical dues in their own treasuries. Then you have the search for absolute governmental sovereignty with the possibility of the state or the prospect of the state appointing church officials, curtailing independent jurisdiction of church courts. So the big picture of the emergence of absolutist states is also operating from behind, and it is giving the German princes some opportunity to defy the control of the papacy, to defy the control of the Catholic Church, in order to consolidate their own mundane power in their empires, in their states, which is mundane affairs of the state, which is about secular state. Lutheranism provided to the princes also an opportunity to shut down monasteries and pocket their wealth, so they are political cum economic causes. Luther's conservatism in political and social matters suited the princes. For example, on temporal authority, Luther keeps referring to godly rulers who are supposed to be obeyed, emperor, the savior, and so forth. These ideas were conservative. These ideas were not something which radicalized people. Rather, it suited the German princes. So they of course ended up supporting Luther. Then consolidation of Reformed Church is generally thought to reflect the emergence of Geneva, which had a history of republican political system as its power base, and John Calvin, Theodore Beza emerged as its leading spokesman. So what now I'm going to tell you about is the element of Calvinism, which subsequently started being referred to as Reformed Church. So we are moving away from Luther to Calvin now. Now, 1520 to 1560, we have the shift from Zurich. It traveled to Bern, to Geneva, and this development, this transmission of reformative ideas and movement was consolidated through the establishment of Genevan Academy, and the Reformed pastors were actually trained here institutionally. The earlier practice, as I said, was to use the term Calvinism to refer to the religious ideas of the Reformed Church, particularly in Switzerland, Holland, and Germany. But of recently, historians are increasingly using the term Reformed instead of Calvinism, because Calvinist ideas were over a period of time subtly modified by his successors, Theodore Beza, William Perkins, John Owen, and so forth. So the origin of the term Calvinist actually dates from 1560s, and from 1550s only there was a realization that conflicts between Lutherans and German Catholics were proving to be very damaging to the empire, and therefore resultantly in 1555 there was this Peace of Augsburg, and it settled the religious question of the principle of your religion, your region determining your religion. So this acrimony between the supporters of Luther and supporters of Calvin, although they were part of the same process, so it acquired a political undertone. In fact, this political undertone was always there. It now became an overtone. And the way it was settled was on the principle that is, your region determines your religion. So it is some kind of a religious nationalism at play over here. Hence, Lutheranism and Catholics were recognized to begin with. There was no provision for Reformed faith in Germany to begin with. Reformed faith was declared non-existent in Germany. Lutherans did not like Calvinists to be operating in their areas. However, in February 1563, Heidelberg Catechism is getting published, and this was based on Calvin's book, The Institutes of the Christian Religion, and that tells you how Calvin is at the base of it. Lutherans opposed this as being Calvinist or foreign. So, it is the religious nationalism, particularly in the northern part of Europe, that is at play, and the outer veneer is that of Lutheran, and they are opposing anything that is foreign, any intrusion that is foreign, in the name of these religious practitioners being Calvinists. Right? So the term Calvinist was used by German Lutherans to attempt to discredit this new and increasingly influential document by implying that it was unpatriotic. That's why I'm using this term, religious nationalism. Given its polemical association, historians think it is more appropriate to use a neutral term, and that is Reformed. And therefore we find that Puritanism, which became very important in the 17th century England and New England, actually is a form of Reformed theology itself. If you juxtapose the two, Lutheran with Reformed Church, what we find is that while the Lutheran is more popular in German, Reformed Reformation or Reformed movement is more popular in Switzerland or Swiss areas. Lutheran owes its origin in the academic context. I have already spoken to you about it, his association with a very ordinary university in Germany. And then Reformed Church is owing its origin in a series of attempts to reform doctrines, morals and worshipping as per biblical pattern. The Lutheran adherents, for them, doctrine of justification was their central theme, whereas for Reformed adherents, they showed little interest in a particular doctrine as such. Reforming program was for them more institutional, social and ethical, which was very similar to humanist movement. Luther was suspicious of humanist movement to the contrary, whereas Reformed theologians had strong humanist inclinations. Lutheran adherents or Luther himself, if you look at his own upbringing and growth, he himself belonged to a small Saxon town under a local prince, which was politically dominated by a local prince, whereas Reformed adherents or thinkers like Zwingli, Bucker, they were all from big cities, great cities like Zurich, Strasbourg, and therefore they associated citizenship with Christianity, and there is a distinct political emphasis in their program which is missing in Lutheran adherents. Luther is focusing more on the redemption of the individual, whereas Zwingli spoke more of the redeeming of community. Luther is talking of two kingdoms and is effectively separating religious ideas from secular life, whereas Zwingli insists on mutual integration of religious and secular ideas. Lutheran religion is famous in not so advanced northern cities where it was considered to be its stronghold, whereas Reformed adherents or Reformed religion was more popular in the southern part of Germany, which had advanced cities, and also Switzerland. So that tells us about the overall comparative perspective of Lutheran Reformation and Reformed movement, which is a big canvas, and we just discussed the finer points, making the two distinct in order to understand what is happening in 16th century under Reformation. Thank you.